everyone. We'll just wait a few more minutes while folks are streaming in. Welcome, welcome. Thanks for joining, everyone. Let's give a few more seconds to let everyone in. I'll make that exactly 3 o'clock BST. Time to kick off, I think. Welcome everyone, thanks for joining us for Building a Platform Framework, lessons learned from developing a multi-cluster Kubernetes operator. Super excited to be joined by Kat and Jake today, and we'll do the 25 minutes presentation, some Q&A at the end, so we love your Q&A. If you've got any questions, pop them in the chat wherever you're watching from. I'll try and curate them, hand them over to Kat and Jake at the end, but yeah, about 25 minutes of talk, and then we'll do some Q&A. Sort of love questions on the talk, but even general platform engineering questions are good too. Other than that, I think we're all pretty much set. I'll hand over to Kat and Jake. Welcome to the stage.
Thanks, Daniel. So this talk is going to be on building a platform framework, our lessons learned from developing a multi-cluster Kubernetes operator, which may sound pretty familiar to a lot of people because that is what Kratix does. So this presentation is kind of our experiences around building that framework, what we've learned, and how you can not make the same mistakes that we did, because we've learned a lot during this time. But it'd be good to introduce ourselves first, I think. So I'm Kat Morris. I'm the product manager here at Syntasso. Been here for a couple of years, and before that I worked at ThoughtWorks and a couple of other consultancies in the platform and technical space. So I've been around this area for sort of 7-8 years now, so way too long. And I've learned a lot about the do's and don'ts of not just building multi-cluster Kubernetes operators, but also building platforms. So hopefully I can share some of that wisdom with you.
Yeah, my name is Jake. I'm an engineer here at Syntasso. Been here almost 3 years. Prior to that, was working at VMware and Pivotal, as well as some time we've worked. So I've been in that sort of CNCF ecosystem, platform engineering space for quite a few years now.
And we're going to start our talk today with a new company, brand new startup called I'm a Little Teapot. And we previewed this company at KubeCon London this year. And hopefully some of these stories don't sound familiar to you, because this is definitely not a collection of our previous experiences and the pains that we felt trying to scale out. So as you said, brand new startup. We've been doing things manually for a long time, and it's been working for us, but we're suddenly super successful with this big AI boom, and we want to try and automate some things. So Jake's going to tell you the journey of automation of your deployments.
Yeah, thank you, Kat. Yeah, I think this is a journey that a lot of people will have been on, whether you're a startup or you're like a sort of a larger company trying to go more cloud native. You might start off being like, great, I want to start doing things a new way. Maybe you want to come along and you see sort of Kubernetes as being the dominant player in the sort of container orchestration space. You start building your platform and sort of deploying things to it. So you might start off in a world where you just have one Kubernetes cluster, and this is quite manageable to begin with. Maybe you're just doing everything, via the CLI. You've got one cluster you're managing. Maybe it's via a cloud provider like AWS, or maybe you're running it on-prem. But overall, just like having one Kubernetes cluster, one team looking after it, doesn't feel too unmanageable. But obviously, as a company scales and grows, in this case, our little AI company, you're going to end up having more and more. So maybe you go from one Kubernetes cluster to 2 Kubernetes clusters. It's still not a crazy amount of complexity. It's still manageable. You can still do everything yourself manually, probably still using one cloud provider. But things don't just stop there. They keep going and going and going. So the next thing might be running multiple AZ. This is where you might start to get a bit more concerned about the complexity. Maybe you start doing things like GitOps. Maybe you start isolating different workloads in different clusters depending on their requirements. But again, it's getting manageable but more complex at the same time. And then maybe you go a level above this. Maybe you now need to run multiple regions. Maybe your sort of availability of your services has to be better. This definitely starts to get more complex. You're bringing in more things around networking. Just in general, the scope is creeping up a lot. You're going to start to look to have some tools in the ecosystem that might be able to help you. And then next thing you know, you're running in multiple clouds. which again introduces a whole set of problems. I think every company aspires to be multi-cloud for multiple reasons, not just vendor lock-in, but the different services they provide and all that sort of stuff. But that is a massive complexity, right? You're really going to struggle as a platform team if you're trying to look after multiple Kubernetes clusters across multiple clouds. And it's just it's a real struggle. And then eventually, if you grow successful enough, or if you're a larger company, you're going to have to admit at some point that you're probably going to have to run something on-prem. It could be on the edge, could just be in some legacy data centers. It could be, wherever you want. But this brings in a whole new world of pain, right? Because now you don't have that cloud experience that you had before. Now you're sort of managing things in the cloud and on-prem, vast amounts of difficulty there. And it's just, the world can get really complex really quickly.
And realistically, you don't just stop at Kubernetes. These services that you run in AWS and Azure on-prem, they're likely to be, you need to do things that aren't just K8s right away. So you're looking at Lambdas. Maybe you are doing databases directly on-prem that you need to automate somehow. And then you start thinking about, do I use Terraform? Do I use some of the automation tools like Puppet and Ansible? And the edge computing comes in as well. And you've got to try and figure out a way of maintaining all of these services at the same time. And what we found is that actually nearly every platform engineer has felt this pain at some point in their career. So we asked this question at KubeCon for everyone to raise their hands if they had felt this struggle, and well over half the room put their hand up. So it's not something that we're just pulling out of thin air. It feels like a much more universal challenge that people have to deal with. So we want to talk about some of the do's and don'ts when building a platform framework based on our experience of not just at the AI I'm a Little Teapot startup, but all of the rest of our career and our time here at Syntasso. And the first thing that you should avoid doing is don't reinvent the wheel and use the ecosystem. And because we presented this at KubeCon, I was able to share the table that everyone has seen of, at the time I took this screenshot, it was 215 different projects across loads of different areas. So not just the standard Kubernetes stuff. You've got observability in there, you've got monitoring, you've got databases, you've got deployments, you've got all kinds of different technology areas. And you've got to think, which one do I pick? Because it's not easy enough to say, don't reinvent the wheel. You have to figure out what thing is going to be useful for you. Because there's some good thinking that's already happened. How do you know which one's going to actually help you build your platform in the right way? And what we used at Syntasso and what we always come back to is a quote by Evan Bottcher. And I don't just like this because it's on Martin Fowler's website and I'm an ex-thought worker. It's like the seminal definition of a digital platform that I see all over the place. And he says that a digital platform is a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, services, knowledge, and support, which are arranged at a compelling internal product. So if you think about this from a product management a little bit more, you can figure out what are the things that are going to be helpful to me. And you can avoid making some of the same mistakes that I have in my past. And a common pattern that we see all the time and that I have done myself is you try and build it all yourself. If you go to the next slide, please, Jake. And you end up with something that looks a little bit like this, that you're a little gremlin that has been covered in water after midnight. And you have to figure out, how do I build all of these things myself? How do I pull all of these pieces together in a way that makes sense for my platform? Instead of thinking about what is the thing that I'm really good at. So instead of trying to build it on yourself, you can instead try to innovate on top of that wheel. So don't try and build everything yourself. Don't try and come up with something brand new every time. Think about how you can take the things that you're best at, the things that you know best, probably your business. At Syntasso, it was platform orchestration, and use that to innovate on top of those existing services. And we did that primarily using Kubernetes concepts and ideas. So the core idea in Kratix is a promise, and it's consistent of an API, dependencies, workflows, and destination rules. And I'm not going to dig into what those are because there are other talks and other videos you can see that describe that in more detail. But we built that as a YAML file that looks quite a lot like a CRD. And that's made it really, really powerful for us to just build quickly and build more effectively and utilize all of those ecosystem tools. We're close enough while still maintaining our own unique value proposition on top of it. And the next slide shows you that in a bit more detail. So we've got all of these different tools that we integrate really nicely with while focusing on being a platform orchestrator ourselves. We don't want to build a GUI. Our team is really, really good at Go and platform engineering and back-end engineering. We're not brilliant at front-end. So we don't want to be rebuilding Backstage or Port or Headlamp. We don't want to be rebuilding all of those amazing infrastructure as code tools like Crossplane and Terraform, Pulumi, because it's not our specialty. Our specialty is that platform orchestration layer in the middle. So we're able to marry all of the strengths of the ecosystem while still adding value on top.
One of the lessons we learned quickly after that is not to try and underestimate the complexity of going multi-cluster. So we sort of picked that we were going to run on Kubernetes and we're going to try and orchestrate Kubernetes as a big part of it. But we quickly realized that this is actually quite complex. A sort of journey that we'd all been on, and we'd seen with a lot of our customers as well, is that lots of companies start off, they might have a single Kubernetes cluster where somebody comes along and says, great, I want to start leveraging all the tools that are in the ecosystem that work really great with Kubernetes. In this case, let's say Kubeflow. They might go and deploy that operator onto a Kubernetes cluster and start making some requests. And it's pretty great, right? The power of Kubernetes and the ecosystem is that you can very quickly start getting value out of this pretty quickly. But things start to grow. Before you know it, you're sort of making multiple requests all to the same operator. Perhaps you're installing multiple operators onto a Kubernetes cluster. Perhaps you're being so successful, this is scaling out across your organizations, maybe having multiple Kubernetes clusters. And you sort of start to hit some of the complexities straight away of like giving each individual person their own Kubernetes cluster is not a great way of scaling and managing multiple Kubernetes clusters. You want sort of a different approach. So what we see a lot of the time is people then start sharing Kubernetes clusters, leveraging those sort of namespace things in Kubernetes and stuff like that. But that still has its own problems. Maybe you have people that are all wanting to deploy the same operator but different versions. Maybe people are being noisy neighbors. It can just get quite complex quite quickly, and you can have different dependencies like on things like cert manager or what versions of Kubernetes you want, and things can quite quickly get a little bit out of hand, and you realize that actually this is a complete mess. Just giving Kubernetes directly to your customers, to your application developers, and letting them almost at random pick where they're deploying things is just going to bring you a world of pain, and we sort of had learned that from our past experiences. So what we started to think about was, okay, when building Kratix, how could we reduce the complexity of managing multiple Kubernetes clusters? So this is where we have this idea of it, that in reality, what we don't want is people interacting directly with Kubernetes. What we'd rather have is a platform engineer comes along and publishes on their platform, hey, I want to make Kubeflow available to my application developers. And the platform should understand the complexity of actually scheduling that workload to all of your Kubernetes clusters and looking after the lifecycle of those workloads. So in this case, after a platform engineer has come and published this, it will be great that if an application developer again can just come to the platform, so not to the Kubernetes clusters directly, but to the platform, and start leveraging this service that's been made available. And they can start saying, hey, I want this workload, and the platform can go ahead and schedule it to a Kubernetes cluster. And this can quickly scale quite nicely to multiple users. So we knew we wanted this setup, but we knew we wanted a lot of flexibility in terms of how to do this scheduling in the back end. So we set our sights pretty well on the user experience. We were trying to learn a bit more about, okay, how should we orchestrate this in the back end? So we started with a pretty simple idea of like, okay, we want a central place where Kratix runs, and we want to schedule loads of Kubernetes clusters. There's a lot of tools in the ecosystem today that try and tackle this. There's tools like Comada, like Argo, and there's loads more that I've not named here that all sort of try to take out the complexity of scheduling one workload to multiple Kubernetes clusters. But we quickly realized a lot of those had some sharp edges. They were very opinionated, and what we actually wanted to do was a slightly more flexible approach that would support a lot of different environments. So this is where we just really leaned into Kubernetes. We're a big fan of Kubernetes here at Citasso, and just in general, I think it's a really powerful tool for building platforms. So we thought, okay, what if we didn't require direct communication from the platform cluster to our worker clusters? What if we just said everything's going to be done via GitOps? And this was quite nice. This was quite powerful. When you start thinking about this, you might have edge Kubernetes clusters that are running offline half the time. You might have Kubernetes clusters across different clouds. But if all of their communication language is just reading files from Git and being reconciled by a tool like Argo and Flux, you're sort of removing a lot of the complexities trying to orchestrate those clusters. So this was quite nice. So once we have this approach, we're like, okay, we need a way of actually identifying and understanding what are these clusters that I have that I'm managing. And this is where we came up with this idea of using labels. We didn't invent this idea. This is just leveraging the idea that exists in Kubernetes today with how you do nodes in a Kubernetes cluster. You create nodes, you assign labels to them. When you're deploying pods, you can say, hey, deploy this pod to a particular node with a particular label. We do this exact same idea here. So you might label a destination with like, what region is it and what's its capability? So in this case, for the Kubeflow example, does this Kubernetes clusters have GPU nodes? So this is quite a powerful starting point we got to. You can imagine it was sort of enabling that world we were talking about earlier. So a platform engineer could come to the platform and say, I want to schedule this workload, in this case Kubeflow, to all of my clusters that have GPU nodes. And then Kratix will come along and take care of the complexity of scheduling it to the right Git repositories that match the requirements. So in this case, only Kubernetes clusters that have GPU nodes true as a label on that cluster. So this is pretty cool. When this was like our first iteration that we got out, and it was working quite nicely. So we started to see that you could really easily provide self-service for things like Kubeflow. So a customer could come to the platform, make a request for a model. In this case, Kratix would take care of the complexity of scheduling it to the right Kubernetes cluster. But again, we learned that actually the scheduling can be quite complex. In this case, when you're making it so easy to schedule things across multiple clusters, there's actually more use cases than we'd thought. So in this case, let's say you wanted to schedule 2 related workloads at the same time, but to 2 separate clusters. Before, we'd always thought of it as very sort of rigid, very singular thing where I'm scheduling one thing to one cluster. But actually, in this case, maybe you wanted to schedule your model to be trained to one particular cluster, but maybe you wanted to schedule its dashboard for that to a sort of cheaper cluster, in this case, like a cluster that hasn't got GPU nodes. So we had to sort of refactor our orchestration to sort of support this scenario. And that was really valuable. Once you sort of let the people come to us at different levels of complexity of their scheduling and it all just works, it's quite nice. But it didn't stop there. What we quickly realized over time is there's actually loads of tools out there that work really nice with GitOps. And a GitOps at its core is right, is just committing files to Git repository and S3 repository and letting it be converged on by an external system. So this isn't new. And there are loads of tools out there already today that support that, like Backstage, Terraform, Pulumi, Ansible. And what we realized is that before we'd written this with just Kubernetes in mind, but actually we wanted to sort of enable using these different sets of tools as well. So then we came back and said, okay, let's reimagine this slightly. Let's say when a user makes a request, they want to train this model. So that's one Kubernetes cluster. They want to have it provisioned in dashboard. That's another Kubernetes cluster. Maybe they want to have it provisioned in S3 bucket using Terraform and being represented in Backstage. These are all things that we had to support. So we had to update our schedule to be more dynamic, supporting a wide variety of tools, and just letting you do GitOps whatever way you want to do, but taking care of the complexity of it for you. So we learned the lesson, don't underestimate the complexity of going multi-cluster. So while we're on this journey, it was really good. We got to the point where we were like, okay, we have this foundational idea. There's the platform, there's an end place we want to run workloads, and there's a Git repository or a state store in between it. How are we going to start communicating information back from that? So things like health checks. And we started off with this really simple idea of just like, okay, let's just run an agent and let's communicate stuff back from the Kubernetes cluster to the platform cluster. And we quickly realized that this could get a little bit messy. You're now relying on connectivity. It can be a little bit difficult. There's a lot more overheads. So like, okay, maybe the next iteration of that is just having a short shared database between the two. So, I don't have to have direct connectivity from my worker to my platform, but some shared database. And then we realized that actually we already have this. It's called a state store. So in this case, when we were implementing this, we were thinking, how can we reduce the complexity of as much as possible? In this case, it's just basically reusing the boundaries and the services we've already put in place. So not introducing new connectivity rules, new databases, just saying, hey, we already agree you can communicate one way for a state store. Why not just leverage this communication in reverse for things like health checks? So we did our best to try and reduce the complexity of the things that are in our control.
And that was a great example of us learning from customer feedback. We've been hearing about that backwards communication for a long time, and people wanted to share that status backwards. We built it and we got great feedback right away. What I want to show you is a little peek behind the curtain of when we may not have been quite so great at that. Because you shouldn't just build the things that you think are going to be awesome. There are more considerations to this, and this is the producty bit of our building a multi-cluster operator journey. So what I'm showing you here is, this is like our ideation board. This is how we figure out how we're going to build the right thing. Well, we've changed now, and hopefully you'll see why when I dig into it a little bit. A customer came to us with a problem, and this would have been 18 months or more ago, saying, how do I version these promises? How do I make sure that I've got the right one being used by the right people? And we were like, promise versioning, that's great. Love it. We'll take that on and do something about it right away. Sounds really powerful and important to you. So we started thinking about it, and that's when the first board was created. That's the one on the left, that first white box. This was our first attempt at figuring out how do we build promise versioning in a way that's going to be useful and effective. And as we started thinking about promise versioning, we had to think about, what about dependencies between these things? How do we manage which version of a promise someone's using? How do you deal with multiple versions of those things? That's when the second board came in. And then we were thinking, okay, what else do other tools do? What about if we scale this out on a wider level? What happens with your platform if you've got 3, 4, 5 different versions of a promise and you need to do a patch across the lot of them? Can you patch those promises? How do you manage that? And that's when the third board came along, and we realized that it was probably turtles all the way down. We could have been thinking about this for a long, long time before we actually got something done. So we called it and started building something that we thought would be pretty simple. And what we realized is it probably wasn't, because I ran the numbers on this before I created this talk, and we spent 2 weeks with 7 people in our team thinking about this journey across these 3 boards in the first place. And then we stopped, took a step back, and started building something that we thought would be the thinnest slice. And that was 3 weeks of the full engineering team building again to try and get something out the door. So we'd spent 5 weeks of our engineering team's effort thinking, building, figuring out what the right thing was to do. And then we found out we didn't get any usage for the first 12 months. That's not great. That means that we wasted all that time building something that wasn't providing value to customers. We could have been building something that would have provided immediate value instead. So what do we learn from this? One thing we might have learned is that you should never listen to your users. No, that's not right. That's a bit extreme. We're not doing that. Just because our user didn't need that feature immediately doesn't mean that we shouldn't have listened to them and taken that feedback on board. And if I'm going to espouse saying that you should never listen to your users, all the product management gods will kill me and shoot me out and will make me pick a new career. So maybe we should have done the fastest thing to unblock our users instead? No, this isn't brilliant, because then we end up with a bit of a massive sprawl and figuring out, like, how do we deal with all these bitty things that we built to help our users will become an absolute massive monster overhead to maintain. It will ruin our ability to architect into the future. Just becomes really, really painful. We still need to think about things before we just build stuff. So instead, I thought back to the wisdom of our CEO here at Syntasso, Colin Humphreys. This is a framed picture that he got for this year's Secret Santa in 2024. And if you've spoken to him at all, he's probably said this quote to you, and it's, "Life is just a series of prioritization exercises." And when he says that, he means that you need to think about all of the possible things you could do. There's an infinite number of things you could be doing with your time. How do you prioritize the highest value thing that you can be doing at any one point in time and remember to focus on that? So really think about it rather than just doing things that you think are brilliant. Just if you're interested, I'd put the QR code up there. He's doing a platform con talk, so he might not talk about this, but he'll talk about other interesting things as well. And when he says this, sorry, I ruined the flow there, Jake, I apologize. But we should be prioritizing our users' needs with our business goals. It's not just prioritizing user needs. It's not just prioritizing the business stuff that we think is going to be super valuable. It's doing them both together. And how do you figure out what your goals are? You do that by remembering why you started in the first place, because that is why we started the company at Syntasso. We wanted to make sure that platform building and platform creation was an amazing experience. Think about your goals for your platform too. So when we talk about making that platform building experience amazing, that story we told you right at the beginning about the really complicated tech stack and estate that platform team was having to manage, we want to make that much easier, because there's been a lot of work done in the ecosystem at the minute about making it much easier for the consumers of a platform. So the app developers, the software engineers building on top of those Kubernetes or cloud services. So they've got this really nice unified interface. But actually, platform teams don't have the same. There's still a bunch of complicated mess that they have to manage as all individual services and components. And that's why we created Kratix. And it's to provide that platform orchestration layer so you can manage all of these services like a fleet, so that you can choose what do you provide to the consumers in this unified interface. And it's proven for the customers we've had so far as a really powerful way of thinking about how do you build a platform beyond just all of the little individual components, but it's helped think, what do the users need and how do I package it in a way that's maintainable and sustainable? So we've given you 3 do's and don'ts there, but there is one big one that we think is probably the biggest lesson that we learned through all of our time developing this multi-cluster Kubernetes operator and Kate's experience.
Never assume your developers actually know Kubernetes. So we learned this the hard way, like Kat was saying. I think we all appreciate Kubernetes as an amazing tool, and it's solving a lot of amazing problems, but it's ultimately a very difficult tool to use, and you can't assume that people are going to come to it and immediately understand it or have past experiences of using it.
It's actually, like, even more interesting than that is you don't think that you think everyone knows it, even at a massive events like KubeCon, but people are still learning. I think there's some stat of like 30 to 40% of the attendees haven't used Kubernetes before and are still understanding and learning about it, which is something that we'd taken for granted when we started this journey. So coming to the end now, so just as a recap, don't reinvent the wheel. because the ecosystem is massive. There's loads of stuff that's already been done. People have solved the hard problems already. But take all of those learnings that people have and innovate on top of them. Don't underestimate the complexity of going multi-cluster. Jake told you a very long story about the pains that can come there and how you can end up in a really messy situation. But reduce the complexity of the things that you can control, because going multi-cluster is going to be complicated. And finally, don't just build the things that you think will be amazing. Product management has taught us this a long time. We still fall foul of it off very frequently. It's really easy to do. But you can avoid that by remembering why you started building in the first place and marrying that with the things that your users are telling you and the feedback that you're getting from your users. Oh, and once again, never assume that people actually know Kubernetes.
Yeah, can't repeat that one enough.
Fantastic work, Kat. Jake, thanks so much. Amazing. And just for folks that are not based in the UK, we're currently dealing with like a heat wave here. So I appreciate Jake, Kat. Like we're sweltering. We don't have air conditioning as standard in the UK houses, so we're all like sweltering here. So take them on for the team. Thanks a lot. Folks, I hope you enjoyed that. Please, we're going to kick around for like at least 10 minutes or so taking any questions. If you've got any questions, pop them into the channel you're watching at, or hit us up on LinkedIn, go on the Kratix OSS Slack, wherever you can find us, DM me, whatever you like, and we'll try and make sure your question gets read out. If we do miss your question, we'll try and get back to it offline, async, and close the loop there. So we love the questions, we love the feedback, and there's lots of stuff there, Kat, Jake. Right? I know when we did this, you did this version of this talk at KubeCon. So many great questions, right? In terms of like just getting people thinking about abstractions, interfaces, how to build platforms, how to like think about platforms as a product. So much good stuff. So let me see. I've got a question from Amy here. Where have you seen technical expertise fail to solve platform challenges, and what makes the difference instead? Who wants to take that one?
I can give that a go, because pretty much every platform I've worked on as product manager, I come in as like the oddball on the side that isn't really typically part of these engineering focused teams. And it's often because technology just hasn't solved the problem, because everyone's kind of offering you something packaged off the shelf and all in one that'll solve all of your problems, and then people are shocked when it doesn't. Or everything's super low level and you have to learn a million different things and you need a massive team to maintain it all. So technology can't fix those underlying challenges of what is the problem I'm trying to solve? Who are my customers? Who am I serving? Because platforms are a socio-technical problem. I had to get that in there somewhere, that buzzword, because they are, right? Like you are building platforms for people. You're not building platforms for computers. So you need to solve for the social problems. And the biggest thing that I found helps there is actually talking and collaboration. I know it's not like the super fun thing, but actually collaborating with those teams. Team topologies talks about it really well, of the different collaboration models, the different types of working together, and the different shapes of teams that can work together. And a platform team really needs to go from that collaboration model, really tight communication, and towards the X as a service model that they talk about. So you can't just go straight to providing things as a service. You have to take the journey to get there. So that would be the big learning for me, of like actually go on the journey and talk to people as you go and collaborate as you go, rather than just assuming technology will solve it straight off the bat.
Yeah, big plus on that. Definitely in my career, like as I've gotten more and more senior, the ability like to talk to people and understand their goals and then phrase it back to them in their language is so powerful, right? And I know you got a talk actually, Kat, like you got a bunch of talks actually, like Agile on the Beach, and you got some other ones like going on. Like I think you might be riffing on some of these topics there, right?
Yeah. So my Agile on the Beach one is about platform as a product from the trenches, which is kind of all about my pains of having to do this job, basically, because it is, people just assume you can write some code and it fixes everything, and that's when you end up with a 10,000 line bash script that solves the world.
Indeed. So, folks, one of the lovely part of the UK, Cornwall, you want to check out Kat's talk. I don't know if tickets are still available, but the talk will be recorded online as well.
I'll also be
And
doing it
there's
at Low Pug in London the week
oh
after.
yes,
So the next Low Pug on the
yes,
9th.
yes. So if you're in London, pop along to that. And then there's going to be Fast Flow Conference, the Platform Engineering Edition, big conference running in September, I believe, as well. We're involved in that, Syntasso Crew, as well as many other awesome companies. So we may be talking, we'll definitely be sponsoring, I guess, and talking about that there. So if you want to chat to Kat and Jake and myself there about these topics, come along to Fast Flow Conf. I just thought that one too. I see a few more questions rolling in. We've got one, maybe one for you, Jake, actually. Why is just giving developers access to Kubernetes such a dangerous trap? And what should teams do instead?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Daniel. I think the talk touched on this a little bit, but I think like calling it a trap is the right way of framing it, because it absolutely is a trap. You sort of look at Kubernetes and the ecosystem, and you can see how everybody's converging around it. Everybody's running tooling on top of it, which is really amazing. It is delivering like so much value, but at its core, it's still a complex tool. It's still an infrastructure tool, and it's not necessarily written with an application developer sort of mindset in mind. So I think when you think about it, it's just a lot of complexity to be pushing on your application developers to understand, what is a deployment? How does replica sets work? How do I do this multi-cluster? How do I do the ingress? These are all things that really, in an ideal world, you wouldn't be putting your application developers. You want to give them more time to think, to want to reduce their cognitive load, and let them focus on actually writing the code. I think what you should be doing instead is sort of what we leaned on a bit in this talk around, like putting an API in front of it, reducing that complexity for them. So, just because your company's using Kubernetes, why are you using Kubernetes? Okay, you want to deploy your applications, okay, and put an API in front of that to provide that experience. And then just almost in an ideal world, you'd almost hide the fact that it was Kubernetes, which means when the next amazing piece of software comes along in 5 or 10 years' time to replace Kubernetes, you can transition off it and your application developers will be none the wiser.
Yeah, love it. That definitely throughout my career, like building platforms, that was like something to aim for, right? That getting that correct abstraction. Because I remember doing Cloud Foundry, then Mesos and Heroku, and then Kubernetes, and like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on there. I plugged Cat's talk. I got to say, Jake, you're going to be at Platform Con in London next week on the booth. So if people want to meet you in real life, ask you lots of questions, come along to Platform Con. I believe tickets are still available as well, right?
Yeah,
They can come along,
absolutely.
see a demo of Kratix and chat to you as well. And I'll be there and a bunch of other folks too. So Platform Con London Live. There's also the online component of Platform Con as well. So you can check us out. I think myself and Paul have got my boss. I've got an awesome co-founder of the company. I've got talks that are going live from London. From Monday as well. And we'll see you in London. Cool. I've got Ben is asking, what's one platform mistake you'd never make again, and what did it teach you? Kat, do you want to give that one?
Yeah, I'll start, and then Jake can share his afterwards. Mine sort of builds on what Jake was saying around the API interface. So we started building a platform, but we've started with the CI/CD component because everyone thought that was most painful, and it involved a really big migration from the existing tools. I think they were on Jenkins. We were going to move to Azure DevOps, and it was going to be amazing. But the interface that we were thinking about for people to use was equally horrible, right? Like there's still no nice way for them to access things. It was still having to like go into the code and dig through Terraform and change the scripts so that they could actually deploy the thing they wanted. So if you had a new version of your app, you had to update the version in there and update your URL path for people. And it was just really unintuitive and complicated. And then I did it again in another project where we were like, oh, these devs, they just want a GUI. So we like slapped a backstage on top of the platform. And backstage is amazing. We get lots of great feedback, and it's one of our biggest like the thing that people ask for and want to use the most. But only providing backstage was really a rubbish idea because people couldn't do anything with it. Like if you didn't have the service they wanted, people would just leave and build shadow IT again. And that's the impact of it, is like people just build the shadow IT that does whatever they want, that isn't managed, that isn't looked after, that isn't compliant, and you end up spending 10,000, like thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a month on databases because someone's forgotten to turn them down because they're not under the billing, like under the billing rules that everything else is. So that would be my biggest mistake, of like not making it really easy for people to do the right thing because we're not providing an interface that makes sense for the users of your platform. And that's sort of, Abby's done a great talk for this as well. Like her KubeCon Paris one, I think. It's like you can't put lipstick on a pig. I love it. It's one of my favorites. Yes. But she talks a lot about with Whitney Lee about interfaces and how to pick the right interface for your users. So watch that and don't make the mistake that I did.
You can find that on our blog, Cat. We know we wrote a summary of that talk, because that talk also happened to Lowbug as well. So fantastic talk by Abby and Whitney. Yeah, +1 to that. Jake, do you want to go? That one as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think, unfortunately, I have too many painful mistakes in the past. I think one of the ones that I did earliest in my career that really stuck with me a lot was I was working at a company that was sort of ramping up, scaling up, and we decided to have this idea of like, okay, we need to have a team to try and reduce some of that complexity for the other application developers. So we spun up this team that was responsible for like provisioning some of the sort of baseline infrastructure and services that each team needed to develop their product. And it was amazing. It was almost the opposite of what Kat was saying, as in everybody was getting so much value out of it. Everybody was really happy with it. But what we didn't really realize is that we were essentially providing a production level service for our application developers. If our ability for them to get those infrastructure that services went down, they weren't able to write the code. They become so reliant on the platform that we built that if it was down for even a few hours, that was a complete standstill. So yeah, just realizing that as you're building out your platform, getting adoption is great, but you still have to treat your platform like a production, right? If it's down, it's going to cost your company time and money.
Oh, yeah, all too brings true to that one, Jake, and some of my consulting experience too. Fantastic. And we got if you could give every platform team one rule for scaling successfully, what would it be? Oh, that's an interesting question. Who wants to take that one?
I mean, I can give the producty answer because I think tech has kind of got this covered, right? Like you can scale up your services pretty easily. You change a number in a config file somewhere. Like there are complexities around it, of course, but like that is one that is really possible. The big scaling challenge that I have hit in my career is when you are the only team that is providing and managing the services, you become the bottleneck. It's like the ticket ops again. Just because you've built a platform for it doesn't mean that you're not still the bottleneck. If people are like, they want to change to a service, they want an update, and that team becomes like the single source of knowledge as well. You have to understand everything about security, everything about the governance, everything about billing, everything about legal that you need for your organization. So thinking early, not super duper early, like at your day one, but like when you've got some reasonable level of adoption, thinking about how are you going to incorporate the knowledge from other teams and other SMEs is really, really valuable. We speak about this a lot internally as something like called multiplayer mode. How do you encourage all of the other people in your organization who can contribute knowledge and services to your platform? How do you make that as easy as possible? And you can use cool things like team APIs that I know Team Topologies talks about to make that really simple, but actually considering the path for people to adopt, to produce things on your platform is like my thing I wish I'd have thought about more in my career.
Love it. Kat, you've got an article on the News Stack, I think, Kat, that talks about producers and
I do. I
consumers.
am
And then
just
Paul,
shilling all of my stuff coming
yeah,
up. That's my answers.
and then Paul has also got one on DevOps.com, I believe. I think he got syndicated on platform engineering as well. So yeah, the whole producer consumer, we say platform democracy sometimes, and there's an article on the News Stack as well that quoted Colin, our COO, and one of the co-founders too. So there's lots of stuff around this space at the moment, isn't there? I mean, Jake, anything you want to add to that, or I can move on to the final question.
No, I think Kat did a great job answering that.
Fantastic. First time I've heard you say that, Jake. So, well done. Great. Actually, probably one for you, Jake, in fairness. So Jenny's asking, how does moving to multi-cluster impact the day two platform engineering work of maintenance, service upgrades, and disaster recovery?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. I think it's similar to what I was talking about at the beginning of the talk around. You can sort of imagine that sort of slow journey of going from one cluster to two, and then to four, and then eight, and then you can sort of start off with the best intentions of thinking that the cost surely can't be that much higher, right? It's all Kubernetes, maybe you're still all on the same cloud provider, but it really does. The cost of it really goes up because I think, as much as we like to say that like every cloud is offering Kubernetes, therefore it's all the same. It's all not. It's all slightly different. You have the versions upgrades within Kubernetes. It's just the moving to multi-cluster has got a lot of cost to it unless you start trying to sort of bring a level above it and thinking about it less as individual clusters and more of these fleet of things that I'm managing. So yeah, I think it's really tricky. I think just trying to make sure you're using services and tools that sort of let you manage it from a level above and not think of it as these individual clusters, more of what are my set of Kubernetes clusters doing as a whole, and just treating it as a fleet. I think is so important.
Yeah, cheers, Jay. We definitely a lot of folks, like Kat mentioned backstage earlier on, people get started really quickly with, say, doing UIs, and the day two story is the tricky story when they want to do upgrades, they want to do maintenance. So folks, have a Google around for fleet management. Check out our blogs as well, shameless plug. But we've like, again, our co-founders, all of us, I think, that have been platform builders at some point in our career, really do believe the day two story is like the most important thing. It's so hard to think about when you're starting platform engineering, but like the day two stuff, how you do scale out patches for 0-day vulnerabilities and upgrades when the database vendors inevitably change stuff is super, super important. And to your point, Jake, when you put the multi-cluster thing on top, it's like another turtle on the stack, as we say, and it's like literally turtles all the way down. So great shout out. I think that's it for questions, folks. I see a few claps coming in. Thank you, Jose, for that. And a few other folks there clapping away on LinkedIn, which is great. So kudos, Kat. Kudos, Jake. People are loving your stuff, which is always good to see, all right? And at that point, I think we'll wrap up. Let's see. A few of us are going to be at Platform Con London Live next week. So come and find us there. Kat will be at Agile Beach the week after, I believe. So, and then we're around in various conferences, the InfoQ Dev Summit in Munich. Kat, you're going to be there too. So hopefully Atlanta, we'll see folks there. So you can find us in real life. We'll be online at a whole bunch of other webinars and other things shortly as well. So stay tuned to our LinkedIn channels. Also subscribe to our newsletter. We give you regular updates of like what we're going to be doing and where and when. So you can check that out as well. But I'll just say thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, folks.